Hi everyone, thank you for joining the second in the Xiel Journal Club webinar series. This presentation is going to be from Ridian Keynes at Clatterbridge Cancer Centre, speaking on the Estro abstract that he presented on a couple of weeks ago. This is going to be a 30-minute presentation with an opportunity for discussion after. And after the presentation, you can either ask questions within the chat or raise Ridian Keynes, who gave an Estro talk and submitted an abstract on when no news is good news, a large centre's experience of a commercial automated in vivo dosimetry system employed as a safety check. Over to you, Ridian.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks everybody for tuning in. It's great to have you with us. As Nathan says, so my name is Ridian Keynes. I'm one of the principal physicists at Clatterbridge Cancer Centre in Northwest, Nathan's very kindly invited me to spend a few minutes talking to you today about our experience with SunCheck as an in vivo dosimetry system, in particular our approach to using it as what I would call a safety check. So I'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we go through. What I'm going to do in this talk, here are my disclosures. So just to mention, we are a Sun Nuclear reference site, and we participate in the SunCheck Customer Advisory Board, and we're also a variant reference site. So what I'm hoping to do in this session is just talk a little bit about Clatterbridge, who we are, and what is our general approach. I'll give a very brief overview of the SunCheck platform, but then really I want to discuss our experience with using SunCheck as an in vivo dosimetry system at scale. So I'm going to talk a little bit about patient numbers as well in the SunCheck patient module. I'll do this in two steps. So I'm going to talk mainly about our sort of process considerations, how we set up that service to work well for a large number of patients. And then if there's time at the end, I'll just go through a clinical case study that was sort of interest to us in this context. So this is our centre. This is Clatterbridge Cancer Centre in Liverpool. That's our flagship site now. So that's the building on the right-hand side. We opened this building in the summer of 2020 during the height of the pandemic, and we got a nice royal address there from, well, King Charles now, but Prince Charles at the time, to the staff there. So that went down well. We opened with two new true beams, brand new Linacs, and the 3 existing Linacs were transferred from our previous main site at Wirral. So we're now split across 3 sites in the Merseyside area. So we've got the main site in Liverpool on the map there. We've got a second site in North Liverpool at Aintree, and we have a 3rd satellite site at Wirral, which is close to where I live. We're a large variant centre, so 10 variant true beams across those 3 sites, 2 of which are the TrueBeam Edge units with this high definition MLCs. We have the Varian Eclipse treatment planning system and the ARIA oncology information system. So that's us. When I put this slide up in Estro, we just hosted the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool, and we'd come 25th out of 26, so that was a good opportunity for some traditional British self-mockery. Alongside the external beam service, we have a number of specialised services. So we have a low energy cyclotron for ocular treatments with protons on the Wirral. We have an HDR brachytherapy suite in Liverpool. We have various flavours of orthovoltage and a full suite of imaging modalities. We serve around 2.5 million people across the 3 sites. So that's our kind of catchment population. And in terms of radiotherapy activity and external beam, this translates to quite a high volume of work. So we produce around 80 to 100 new treatment plans per week for external beam. And on any given day, we're treating about 330 or between 300 and 350 treatment fractions. So quite a high volume situation, and something to bear in mind with things like in vivo dosimetry. So when it comes to our general approach, our motivations and requirements, we tend to consider all of our work and service improvement initiatives within the context of these three areas: safety, quality, and efficiency. They're sort of numbered in that order, sort of deliberately, I guess. But we're particularly interested in, you know, service improvement and initiatives that place us in the middle of that Venn diagram, really. So areas where work that allows us to make improvements in all three of these areas at the same time. So in particular, we've come to value things like lean processes, standardization as much as is appropriate to do so, and automation where we can. Because we're a single physics team operating across three distinct geographical sites, we also value web-based and paperless solutions, and we're all doing elements of hybrid working and working from home as well. So being able to access our data from anywhere in a sort of site agnostic fashion has become quite important for us. So in terms of the SunCheck platform, we felt that ticks quite a few of those boxes for us. So in particular, it integrates aspects of patient-specific and machine QA into a single integrated platform with a single login and a single UI, and that helps in terms of minimizing the amount of training that people need. In some ways, consolidating our QA under a single umbrella with SunCheck parallels the journey that we've been on with Varian and our sort of treatment planning and delivery work. SunCheck is a web-based system as well, if you weren't aware. So it does mean that we can get into it from anywhere, and that works very well for us. And we felt really from the beginning that the heavy emphasis on automation within the SunCheck system would suit a large centre like our own and unlock potential for significant efficiency savings across the service. So very briefly, this is like a schematic of what I would sort of call the SunCheck family tree. So within the sort of main SunCheck umbrella, you've got two main modules: SunCheck Patient on the left and SunCheck Machine on the right, and it literally is left and right as you log in and go to the dashboard. And then within SunCheck Patient, there's a number of sub-modules. So we have something called Plan Check, which looks at physics and dosimetry checks at the sort of plan checking stage. You've got Dose Check, which is your independent secondary calc for sort of legal and governance requirements. That supports external BM and brachytherapy now, and we're using it for both. And then you've got perfraction, and then within perfraction you have something called fraction 0, which is the pre-treatment phantomless QA, so kind of the EPID-based pre-treatment QA, and then fraction N, which is the in vivo dosimetry stuff. That's what I'm going to get into. And then very briefly on the SunCheck Machine side, you've got a number of components within there as well. So you've got things like device integration for things like your QA3 and IC profiler. You've got EPID-based QA, image-based QA for a lot of the traditional LINAC QA tests, and we've had quite a fair amount of success with that workspace in particular. And then there's an automated scheduling and analysis section as well. But I'm going to come down now onto fraction N, which we've had in our clinic for about 3 years at this point, and just tell you something of our story with that. So our kind of in vivo dosimetry journey, I suppose, I would trace back to a number of guidance documents that have existed in the UK for some years now. You may well be familiar with this one, Towards Safer Radiotherapy. I think they are working on a new edition currently. But this makes a number of significant recommendations, and in particular in terms of in vivo dosimetry, it does make a strong recommendation that every radiotherapy centre in the UK should have protocols for IVD, and they say it should be used at the beginning of treatment for most patients. So that's kind of the position there. It is a recommendation by the Chief Medical Officer for England, and in many European countries it's in fact a legal requirement, and I think this largely follows on from high-profile radiotherapy incidents that have occurred, the likes of Epinal and so on come to mind. But to our shame, really, we have been historically quite poor at complying with this guidance at Clatterbridge. So just very briefly, previously, you know, I would say our in vivo dosimetry efforts were very limited. We do have a TLD service for our electron patients and skin brachy sometimes, and that gets some use. We did have a limited run with diodes at one point on one LINAC, but it was quite very limited really, and set back by practical difficulties, and it's no longer in routine use. And this may be true of your experience as well. If you've had more successful diodes, I'd be interested to talk to you. But as things have moved on for us treatment-wise, so we do a lot of VMAT now and rotational techniques. There's an argument that making a point dose measurement on the patient's skin surface is like less relevant now than it used to be. So there's also that consideration as well. We then ran for a period with a transit dosimetry solution at our Aintree site. So this is from another vendor. This is an EPID-based solution and arguably more useful for VMAT, but this particular solution had sort of quite an onerous analysis component and was therefore quite limited in terms of scalability. It was also not compatible with TrueBeam, and at the time we were moving more and more Linux onto that platform, so it was a bit of a non-starter for us in terms of continuing with that. So that brings us to transit dosimetry within SunCheck, and just very briefly, just to introduce the concept of transit dosimetry. So what happens here is SunCheck will take the patient DICOM information from the planning system. So we push that out before treatment, and it will calculate what it expects to see at the EPID MV panel during that treatment delivery. So you've got an expected image there on the left, and then that's something that we can directly measure. We can schedule that image and acquire that image for treatment during first fraction, and then SunCheck will automatically retrieve that image for us from our ARIA system and perform an automatic 2D gamma analysis in the background, and then present the result of that analysis to the user through a nice dashboard interface where it collates all the patients together. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to address our general clinical philosophy, I would say, when we come to in vivo dosimetry. So we view fraction N and in vivo dosimetry generally as very much a safety check rather than a quality check. So really we're looking to detect gross errors in treatment delivery, not the smaller setup issues. We feel we've got other processes in place to address those smaller day-to-day errors, things like patient anatomy changes and so on. In particular, all of our patients are getting daily IGRT now with daily online corrections. But that said, I would also refer you to the excellent papers by Evie and her team in Belgium, who have done loads of work looking at the types of errors that you can detect, and they've produced some really excellent work there, so I'd commend that to you. But in terms of our safety check approach, we subject our measurements to a relatively wide tolerance. So we typically look at 10%, 5 millimeters at the panel. So 10% for us is derived loosely from IRMA reportability guidance, the SAOI guidance, and 5 millimeters is a typical PTV margin for us. So that's sort of, you know, some sort of rationale there. 10% is also referenced in towards safety radiotherapy for diodes. We do measurement at the beginning of treatment. We're not currently performing continuous daily fraction monitoring, and we only do the integrated images at Clatterbridge. So that's the absolute dosimetry aspect. We don't do log file analysis and 3D plan recalculations on Combium CT. But all of these features are available in the system if you want to go down that route. I'm just saying we've chosen not to do that at this time. And at the risk of labouring the point slightly, I just wanted to put a little bit more science behind this choice of a wider tolerance. So the image on the right here is from a forthcoming paper that Aisling in Northern Ireland has been working on with a few of us. We've conducted a survey of SunCheck users internationally and looked at what tolerances people are using. This is the current distribution of tolerances that are in use for clinical in vivo dosimetry with fraction N. And you can see our choice of 10% 5 millimeters is definitely at the looser end there in terms of community consensus. But a couple of strands of argument we'd offer in defense here. So first would be alarm fatigue. So remember, we're doing a lot of patient treatments, 300 odd fractions in a day. There's quite a well-established phenomenon within other clinical settings. So in particular, neonatal ICUs, there's a nice paper on alarm fatigue. So basically the idea is if you have a system that is constantly alerting you to something that might not be correct and generating potentially a large number of false positives, that can have the effect of desensitizing the human operator to the potential significance of that alert. So we're trying to avoid that desensitization effect with a larger tolerance. The second strand, which is closely related, is something called prevalence effect. And this goes back to vigilance research in the 1960s, really. But it says that when you've got a large number of we've got a large number of what you call a high background rate, so a large number of false positives, identifying maybe the one case in 100 that needs a serious intervention becomes more difficult than if there are fewer flags in the first place. So it's a sort of similar but separate consideration. Thirdly, I just want to make the point that the dose error at the panel is not the same as the dose error in the patient necessarily. So our experience suggests that PTV dose error is typically around half of what we see at the panel. But I don't want to put too strong a claim on that because there's definitely more work needed there, and I'd be interested in developing a study around that. And then sort of lastly, in vivo dosimetry is very much the last sort of stop at the end of a tightly controlled chain. There's a lot of other QA going on before we get to treatment with much tighter tolerances sort of upstream. So you could argue it's not appropriate to have all of your QA operating at that sort of tight tolerance level. And just to make the final point that the high-profile radiotherapy incidents, which unfortunately have occurred, tend to be correlated with those larger dosimetric and positional errors. So the headlines that we see from time to time, unfortunately, are the sort of 20%, 30% dosimetric errors, not the 3 and 4% that you may be sort of looking to correct with other means. Okay, so in terms of the practical aspects, setting up the system and so on, there is a bit of LINAC calibration involved. So firstly, you calibrate your panel for dosimetry. So we follow the variant process for that. There's flood and darks and dosimetry calibration. And then there's also a per fraction specific calibration that we'll do that involves delivering fields through various thicknesses of solid water, and that characterizes the energy and the panel response. So it's pretty straightforward. It's all quite automated. I would estimate around an hour per beam per LINAC. So for us, we've got 30 such beams. So you can do the maths there. We repeat the flood and dark and dosimetry calibrations every 3 months. And then we have a QA phantom, sort of an anthropomorphic phantom for verifying calibrations and sort of doing any ad hoc system QA that we want to do. This is our sort of very top level summary of our in vivo dosimetry process. So patients will come through this pathway. They're planned and scanned according to standard protocols. And then at the plan check stage, we push the DICOM stuff out to dose check and do that bit. And then we have a script that we run that determines whether or not the patient's suitable for measurement. I'll come on to our exclusion criteria in a second. If the patient's suitable, then we just schedule an integrated dosimetry image at the pre-treatment stage. And then at treatment, that imager just comes out automatically. It's very passive to the user. We ask them to be aware of collision risk. And then, as I say, that image is automatically collected by SunCheck, and the analysis is automated and presented to the user. We have a team of dosimetry technicians that log in each day and keep on top of those results for us. Anything they can't immediately sort out, they will then escalate through to our physics help desk. This is our exclusion page. So at the moment, we don't measure plans that will likely irradiate the panel electronics. We're trying to take a fairly conservative approach there to maintaining the longevities of our panels. They're quite expensive to replace. We don't do our simple single fraction palliative treatments, so what we call our VERT SIMs. We avoid GA patients just because of the risk of getting the panel tangled up with the GA equipment. We don't do SRS because of large couch rotations. And then in general, we're looking to avoid other situations where there might be a collision risk. So again, couch rotations, but also very lateral isocenters. And breast boosts are a fairly large category for us as well, because we tend to find with the anterior boost fields, there's not sufficient clearance behind the patient because it's got a high isocenter, so we avoid doing those. And then this would be our sort of results page, or sort of results in inverted commas, because it's not sort of massively scientific, but this is what we put on our poster at Estro. But we did a SQL pull from our system just to look at sort of some bulk data. So between July 2019 and October 22, when I did the query, we think we'd measured between something like 9,500 patients. That's probably closer to 10,000 patients at this point in time. So over 22,000 individual beam measurements, so a fair bit of data there. Looking at sort of the kind of cohort statistics, we see a mean gamma pass rate of 96%, median pass rate reassuringly of 100, and about 93% of all the beams pass our local criteria. So then, in terms of like human involvement, so this is what I feel is the meaningful results for us here. So our first line dosimetry review, so there's that daily login that we have going on with the team there. They consistently report it's a fairly quick job to go in and just triage the data. They quite enjoy that shift. They tell me it's quite a light duty just to scan through the dashboard, about 30 to 60 minutes per day for that. And then there's sort of second line physics troubleshooting, so anything that's a little bit more out of the ordinary, including sort of MPE review and so on, that is really quite minimal. So we estimate no more than an hour per month. I tend to handle most of the queries myself. I did actually create some physics training for my colleagues, thinking that, you know, we have so much data, we'd need a big team in place to deal with it. But actually the event frequency has been so low that we've not really needed to roll that training out in anger. So it's in some ways a system that has been operating very passively and very invisibly to the end users. And so, you know, I quite like that in some ways. And we've not detected any significant treatment errors over this period, fortunately. Some common failure modes. So just to take you through a few little things that can go wrong. Big one for us is panel offset. So unfortunately, the SunCheck system doesn't at the moment correct for measurements that are done off central axis. So, and doubly unfortunately, TrueBeam will automatically move the panel off axis if it thinks the beam is quite asymmetric, and if you haven't explicitly specified a 0-0 position for the panel. So we do get this quite a bit, and you'll see an offset then between the expected and delivered image, and that leads to a large area of gamma failure, and it's basically an instant fail. It's quite easy to resolve. You just repeat the next day with the panel in the right position. It normally goes through okay. Calibration drift's another one. So this, the telltale sign here, is a sort of constant offset between the expected and delivered dose, both inside and outside the field. So that's normally corrected with a quick redo of the flood and darks, and quite quick to correct. I made a word cloud here of the sort of event comments that our dosimetry team are putting in when they see a fail, and you can see some of the top offenders there. So panel offset is quite prominent in that image. And then what I've done in the middle here is broken down our fails over this cohort by treatment site, and you can see, in fact, quite a large majority there are breast treatments. So firstly, we do a lot of breasts anyway, so I'm not surprised they're quite heavily representative. Secondly, they are quite prone to this panel offset situation. That image in the top left is in fact a breast treatment. And also, we found that with fixed gantry, the 2D gamma analysis is quite sensitive to translational errors. So if the breast moves slightly inside the field aperture, it's more likely to trigger a fail there. More often than not, it's not clinically concerning, so we just carry on. But I think also this connects with some work that Paul Doolan's done in Cyprus. He's done a very nice phantom study looking at sensitivity to different types of errors, and he found that for fixed gantry treatments, it's very sensitive to translational errors. So it's nice to see that kind of tie in. So I just, in the last few minutes, if there's time, Nathan, I'm just going to go through this clinical case study that I've put together. So this is, you might ask, when you're running at such a wide tolerance, do you really catch anything at all? And I'd say the answer is yes. So here's an example of one that we looked at. This would have been about autumn last year, I think. So this is a palliative lung case, the 17:2 COVID fractionation that we introduced, but we've since retained as a standard protocol. And what we've got here, as you can see in the image, is a left upper lobe pleural effusion that was present at the planning scan. It was developed following diagnostic CT, so we didn't see it until planning. And then when we came to measure this fraction 1, we had quite poor gamma results, so less than 80% on ARC2, even at 10% 5 millimeters. And we saw an area of gamma failure biased towards the SUIT part of the field. It was planar KV setup imaging only. That's what we do for palliative lungs. So this was because we only had 2 fractions in total. We've delivered 50% of the treatment effectively at this point. So that was flagged immediately to physics for review. This is what the result looked like inside the system. So you see that mismatch between delivered and expected image with the area of gamma failure in the middle. And then here's the sort of dose profile through the center of that field. So the pink is the delivered, and you can see it's quite a bit higher than the expected. Okay, so first thing we did was we did a patient QA measurement. So we got, get the patient off the bed. We've got a portal dosimetry process in place at Clatterbridge. It's very quick to do. And that went through no problem. So the agreement between delivery and expected without the patient present is very, very good. So over 99%, 3%, 2 millimeters. We had to look at the dose check with no concerns there. And we had to look at the patient journal just to see if there any issues with movement or compliance or anything like that. And there's nothing obvious there either. So we flagged the clinician. We advised we would do a cone beam CT prior to fraction 2 for some offline assessment. So we brought our patient in early. So I think the original appointment was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We brought them in 11 o'clock in the morning just to have a look. So surprise, surprise, we did the cone beam. So there's the planning scan. I've just put the cone beam over the top, and you can immediately see there's almost complete resolution of that consolidation. And that was correlating with the areas of gamma failure, which we saw previously. So there was also some associated left-right deformation of the mediastinal tissue, including CTV. So we took the patient off the bed without any further treatment because we thought, well, okay, this is our reason for the fail. So, but that all said, when we take those cone beam densities back into the planning scan and recalculate the plan, the dosimetric effect is still fairly limited. So although it looks quite dramatic on the epidosimetry, the increase in PTV mean dose is only about 0.2 gray here. You do see some slightly larger 105% hotspots appearing in the PTV. So we reviewed all this on screen with the clinician, and we agreed that while the raw dosimetric impact was likely okay, that sort of incidental finding around sort of a little bit of CTV sort of deformation associated with the lung reinflation was enough to persuade the clinician that probably on balance it'd be good to rescan and replan. Although there was a consensus really that had we treated the second fraction, it would have been unlikely to have produced a significant clinical detriment. So it's nice finding, nice incidental finding, and kind of shows you that the system is catching things, but still of limited dosimetric effect. Just looking back at this fraction 1 set of images, you can in fact see in retrospect, and knowing all of that information, you can see on the right the KV image showing a bit of resolution of that fluid. But that, you know, that wouldn't have been scrutinized during setup. They'd just been looking at bony match. So you know, we wouldn't hold anyone to account for that really. We rescanned, replanned, delivered fraction 2. This is the measurement from fraction 2, and you can see excellent agreement throughout now, over 99% at 3%, 3 millimeters, even on the very tight tolerance. So all well in the end. So a few reflections here. So the fraction system identified a potentially significant patient anatomy change that we didn't detect with our protocol setup imaging. Secondly, with it being a hypofractionated schedule, each fraction was very critical to the overall course of treatment. This was a palliative case, but you can imagine in something like a SABRE, there might be sort of more clinical concern around sort of delivery accuracy. But that real-time monitoring for SunCheck was very key to offering a timely intervention. It helps us sort of have a look in a more structured way at additional QA that helped us then diagnose the issue, and just having that early clinician involvement and a fairly broad collaborative approach between physics and treatment just meant we came up with a solution we were happy with quite early on. And then obviously that fraction 2 was delivered with sort of good fidelity. So just to round up, I think this is my last slide. I've hopefully tried to convey something of our enthusiasm for standardization and automation across our radiotherapy service. And we feel that SunCheck has helped us do that, particularly within in vivo dosimetry. I've talked about our use of fraction N as a safety check within a broader context of other patient and machine QA. We feel that large tolerance, it is a large tolerance in terms of the sort of kind of peer consensus, maintains a low noise floor for us on the system, but it does help us identify cases that may warrant significant intervention. And I would say within a resource constrained environment, which you know is true for us, as I'm sure it will be true for many other trusts around the UK, it's allowed us to scale our in vivo footprint from a few skin patients historically to what we feel is now a fairly major IVD service that's virtually invisible to the end users. So in that sense, no news is good news for us, and that's kind of where the title of the talks come from. I'll finish with acknowledging my colleagues here at Clatterbridge.
Yeah, my question is already there in the chat channel. Also, the channel also I have put. The question is about the the exclusion criteria for the palliative cases there. So, any particular reason you are excluding that category of patients from in vivo dosimetry? The reason why I am asking is in the previous center where I worked, we did come across an error in the palliative calculation, and especially is more vulnerable because smaller fractions, higher dose. So any particular reason you are excluding that category from IVD? Hello, gentlemen. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really interesting. I am hearing you. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Great. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that question. This is, you picked up on an interesting consideration there, definitely. So yeah, I mean, all of our sort of troubleshooting protocols and action cards that we refer to in terms of how we would deal with a fail refer to sort of follow up in terms of because we're trying to deliver an in vivo dosimetry service at the beginning of treatment. So where we deliver the whole treatment in a single fraction, so very common for those sort of palliative cases, an 8-gray single or so on, there's an argument to say, well, it's not giving us any actionable information, so we can't get the patient back and do a repeat measurement because we've already delivered the whole fraction. Now, I'm aware that there's an argument to say that, well, even if you've delivered incorrectly, you may still want to know that you've delivered incorrectly, and that's something that you would sort of feed back to the clinician. And certainly it's something that we'd consider doing at some point. It's just when we launched with this service, we we felt that sort of grey area around actionability was sort of enough to kind of sort of leave it out for, you know, initially. So I suppose we should go back and look at that and whether it's something that we want to expand on for sure. But the other thing is, you know, we do have all of those other aspects of QA in place. You know, relatively low probability event. Does it justify the additional work to do all of the measurements? So yeah, it's I understand what you're saying completely, and I'm not entirely reconciled to it myself, but yeah, I put those criteria on screen just for reference, but I completely accept that you may want to measure those single fraction treatments in your clinic for sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sankar, and thank you, Ridian. So we'll go back to the first question then from James Early. So James, if you're able to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, Nathan.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. My question I put right at the start, so I couldn't hear any of the audio. So it was a question of whether I needed to connect via the phone, but then the technical difficulties came through, so I could indeed hear. That was the question. But Ridian, great presentation. Definitely appreciate it. I think that whole discussion about safety and what you're looking for is a real key thing, and a useful discussion point as well. It's certainly making me sort of consider what we do with the additional resources that we put in. It's certainly not half a man hour to 1 man hour a day. So yeah, it's good food for thought. Thank you.
No, thank you, James.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks, Ridian. That was a really nice talk and some really nice work. You've obviously got a huge amount of data automatically sort of flowing up to your SunCheck system daily. And how smoothly does that kind of automated data transfer and processing generally work? And how often does it grind to a halt and need intervention to keep that import queue running smoothly?
Thanks, Chris. Do you mean in terms of the data transfer from ARIA into SunCheck?
Just the whole thing, because you've got data coming from your Linux into SunCheck, and presumably all of that happens automated, and you're not having to intervene, and then you're just getting your results churned out at the other end. How often does that kind of need intervention to keep running smoothly?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. So yeah, honestly, I would say that side of things is pretty smooth. The DICOM query retrieve is just a standard DICOM QR protocol that is kind of quite well established. You know, sort of when we first started, we were a bit concerned because we started with per fraction before we were using it for dose check, so not all of our patients were going through the system automatically. And I was a bit concerned that we would be forgetting to send patients to per fraction in the first place, and then it just wouldn't know about them in order to fetch the image. And I'm sure we would have had a few cases like that. But since we've moved to SunCheck for dose check as well, it's now like a default export location for all patients. And so it just kind of knows about everybody that's on treatment. And yeah, as I say, by and large, that image retrieval works very well. We've had occasional server slowdowns, but more on the dose check side than the per fraction side.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we can get some more information from Sanukla, but I think computationally, the 3D dose check that's done at the start of treatment is more intensive than the 2D gamma analysis that's done on the EPID. So yeah, occasionally, you know, kind of like you go in and reboot the server and it just like comes back to life. But like by and large, it's fairly low maintenance.
Okay, so those server reboots are fairly infrequent.
What was that last bit? Sorry.
Just confirming, so that it's fairly infrequent that you have to go and reboot servers and things.
Yeah. We went through a patch last year where we were getting some SQL deadlocks for some reason, but Sun Nuclear were very responsive and helped us sort of sort that out fairly quickly. We actually have a 3-server system here, so we're a little bit unusual, partly because of the large number of patients, but also kind of we wanted to guarantee uptime for our ghost check service, because if that went down, then we'd have immediate patient delays. So we've got a database server that kind of sits on the virtualized database server. We've got 2 physical servers, and they've both got quite high spec graphics cards now. So we did an upgrade of one of the older servers quite recently, and since we've done that, yeah, it's been fairly plain sailing. We've not had any more SQL issues. So yeah, I would say, you know, on that side of things, it's been relatively straightforward. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great, thank you. I don't think we have any more questions, but if anyone thinks of any, you know, that comes up, you know, in the coming days or weeks, do feel free to get in touch with either myself.
Did you want to just try Simon again? I think it was Simon had a question. I think we heard a snippet of audio and then we moved on.
Yeah, I believe Simon's might have been due to the audio issues at the start. Simon, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all, and thank you, Ridgen, for your time in presenting, you know, this really great work you've done over the last few months, and obviously over the last few years with SunCheck. Thank you for all your questions and for your patience with the technical difficulties. Technology never behaves how you want it to. If anyone has any questions for Ridgen or for us, do feel free to get in touch with either myself or Phil Neal, and we'll get those questions answered. Recordings will be shared as well after, for those who couldn't make it live, and for those who could, so you can share with the rest of your team if anyone from your team couldn't attend the webinar. Thank you all for your time, and thank you, Ridgen, and have a good rest of the day and week.